مصلحا ومجددا فارنوا بنظر طاهر وجناني.
Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today we have another special guest, our beloved brother Abdul Hai Thomas from the United States, who has accepted the true Islam Ahmadiyya. Assalamu Alaikum, dear brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So our first question for you is, what is your name and background?
So I was born Marcus David Thomas, July 26, 1982. That was the name my mother and father gave me. But now my name is Abdul Hai Dawood Bajwa Thomas. That is the name my beloved Huzur gave me in July of 2012. And my background, I was born and raised in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio. So I was born and raised in Kettering, Ohio. And I was born and raised as a Presbyterian Christian.
MashaAllah. So the first real question is, what religion were you following before Ahmadiyya? And maybe if you can mention some of the views you held.
So I went through many, many different views. So as I mentioned before, I was born and raised a Presbyterian Christian. Went to church on Sundays, went to Sunday school, went to vacation Bible school growing up as, a young child. And from a young age, I was always intrigued with religion. Religion was a part of my family. My grandfather was a very religious man. My grandmother was the youth leader at our church in Dayton, Ohio. And, she probably volunteered 50 or 60 years of her life. Either she volunteered or just took very little money for what she did. So I always saw that. I always saw those basic tenets of religion, the faith, the service, the work, and really just being devoted. So that was where I really originally got my interest from. And as stated before, when I was younger, I was always intrigued with religion. So going to vacation Bible school was not a big deal for me. Going to Sunday school was not a big deal. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing the stories. But at a certain point, it just didn't make sense. It just started not clicking. And I was baptized at 10. I accepted, Jesus as my Lord and Savior when I was 10 years old, and got baptized at 10. And then 3 years later, I went through a confirmation course for our Presbyterian church. It was an 8 or 9 week process. We had to go through classes, a couple times a week. It was very rigorous. But I started to ask questions during these confirmation classes to our pastor. And the normal answer I would get from him was, that's what the Bible says, so just accept it. Or often it was, there's just mystery to what we believe, and you have to accept this mystery. And I just felt that didn't put my heart at ease. So as we went through the classes, I felt like I was reading, mythology. I felt like I was reading a comic book at a certain point, when we read the Bible. And I started getting concerned. So I asked, how is Jesus God and the Son of God and the Holy Spirit at the same time? How was he born of a virgin birth? How was he crucified on the cross? He died and then he was resurrected. And I always got the same response. I was either pushed to the side, ignored, or just believe it because that's what the Bible says. So my first introduction to Islam was actually when I was 10 years old. I begged my mother in 1992 to take me to see the movie Malcolm X. And when we went to go see that movie, I had just recently been baptized. I was into religion. But when Malcolm X went on the Hajj and I saw his transformation, I looked at my mother and I said, I'm going to do that one day, right? Go to Hajj, be a Muslim, and study. And I remember when he was in the Prophet Muhammad's sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in his masjid and he was reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, I remember my heart was just singing. I could feel that vibration. And I knew that that's what I wanted to be. So anyways, jump back, going back to, being confirmed. At a certain point during the confirmation classes, I got very, very, very skeptical, and we had to go through a process where we had to write a testimony, and we had to, present it before the elders and the deacons of the church. And so they listened to my story, they listened to my testimony, and they approved my confirmation as a member of the church. And I had to deliver my testimony from the pulpit. And as I was reading it to hundreds of people who were there for this confirmation class, I just felt like I was on fire. I felt like I was lying. I knew this wasn't the truth. I knew that I was doing it for my grandmother. I was doing it for my mother. But I just knew that this wasn't what I wanted. And shortly after that, I started to become atheist at 13 years old. I started to stray from the church very, very quickly, because after being baptized and during the confirmation, I was reading the Bible from, Genesis, up to Numbers. I read straight forward, and it just wasn't clicking. It just wasn't making sense. So following that, I was just very, very concerned about what was going on. So I started to stray from the church, started to make excuses on why not to go to Sunday school or vacation Bible school or, anything that had to do with church. And eventually, in my teens, once I started really getting into the world and, getting into intoxicants and, all the things that young youth do here in the United States, I just became an atheist. And I could feel my heart start to harden at that point in time in my life. And shortly after, I joined the military. So I joined the military when I was 17 years old. I got parental consent, and I joined the military. And that's where things got even worse. I became more and more atheist. I didn't believe in anything. And the military really, truly radicalized me. They focused they really took that vulnerability that I had, that anger that I had. I was incredibly angry, and it turned it and converted it into this viciousness. So the military is an absolute antithesis of Jamaat Ahmadiyya and Islam in all regard. So on one side, in the military, the more debaucherous you are, the more angry you are, the more violent you are, the faster you climb through the ranks. And Islam is the complete opposite, right? The more pious, the more righteous you are, the faster you climb through the ranks, the spiritual ranks, of course. So as I was going through that process, the anger just was there. And like I said before, I became radicalized, and I became very, very, I started to gain notoriety in the military because of how I behaved and how I treated people and what I was able to do, during my time in the service. So nevertheless, during my time in the military, we went to a lot of Muslim countries, so we went to Kenya, we went to Djibouti, Africa, we went to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and I actually saw Muslims practicing. And even during that time, where I was, an atheist all the way, to my core, when I saw Muslims praying, I always told my friends, we're on the outer banks of Iraq on the Qasr River, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, man, I'm going to do that one day. I just thought it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. Just this group of men who just stopped everything that they were doing and just going and offering prayers. So that was something that always attracted me to it. When I got out of the military, I became incredibly just self-destructive, went through a bout for about 5 years of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it really wasn't because of anything that I did during my time in combat during Afghanistan and Iraq. It was really the post-traumatic stress disorder came from what I was doing every day in the United States, just living on base, being a normal, infantryman, Marine. So that's where the trauma came from, because all this stuff gets normalized, and you internalize it, and you think this is what you need to do to exist. So I'd always been interested in Islam. I was studying, and during my time in the military, I read a lot of John L. Esposito. He's an Islamic, non-Muslim Islamic scholar. I read books, Malcolm X. I was listening to, Wu-Tang Clan, of course, Yasin Bey, Mos Def, Black Thought and the Roots, Talib Kweli, Rakim. I mean, all these guys I was listening to, their music is laced with the Quran. It's laced with Islam. So I was listening to all this, hearing, about the 5%ers, about the Nation of Islam. So I was always attracted to that. And when I got out of the military, I was I was just very vicious. I was hard-hearted. When it talks about in Surah As-Saf, when it talks about your heart, or when it talks about the believers needing to mold themselves and become together like molten copper, right? So that's how my heart was. So if anybody ever talked to me about God, if anybody ever talked to me that they were going to pray for me, I would curse them out. Just get out of my face with that. Nobody wants to hear that nonsense. Nobody's listening to that. There's no God. He's not real. If he's real, strike me dead right now. I was challenging God at that point in time in my life. And I'm sure you've heard this before from other people, so at a certain point, I was just in the world, always intoxicated, always chasing the world. That's what I was about. And so one day I was driving past a mosque in Columbus, Ohio. After I got out of the military, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I was driving down the street and I saw this mosque, and I drove past it and I got to the stoplight and something told me to turn around. So I turned around in my car, went to the mosque, knocked on the door, and, nobody answered. So I waited there for about 5 minutes again. Nobody answered. And I started walking to my car, and this Muslim brother comes out, says, "Assalamu Alaikum, how are you?" And I, greeted him back. I said, "Hello, how are you?" Introduced myself. And he told me, I came in and I said, "I'm interested in Islam, but I don't think I'm ready yet. I was wondering if I could get a Quran." And he kind of looks at me, just, very skeptically. And he, so he just looks at me very skeptically. And then we walk, we talk for a little bit. And then, we start walking to my car. And I asked him again, I said, can I get a Quran? I really want to start studying and get to know a little bit about it. He asked me, so he goes inside, goes and gets the Quran and comes back out. And I still have it to this day. It's a non-Ahmadi Quran, but it's in plastic, and he starts to hand it to me, and I reach my hand out to grab it, and he pulls it back and he says, "I shouldn't give this to you because you're not a Muslim." He's like, "But here you go anyways." And that feeling really left a bad taste in my mouth. And I went back one more time, and I watched them offer their salat. And I was enamored, but I just didn't feel safe with it. So, I read the introduction to that Quran, and it talked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he talked about, and I knew that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a revolutionary, right? I knew that from what I was reading. It gave the most beautiful account of the countenance and character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm maybe 20, 22, 23 at this point. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. But again, my heart was so hard and I was so deep into the world, I just didn't know how to get there. So, the years passed and I went from agnostic to atheist, practiced Buddhism for a little bit. I went to the temple, thousands of idols, I'm sitting there, as the monk is chanting, and, he does some blessing on these little orange wristbands that he would give us. So, at a certain point when I was in college, I had like 20 of these on my wrists. I thought they were blessings. And, I looked at them as idols, like they were going to save me from something. And so time passed. And then after that, I realized Buddhism wasn't the key. So I went back to atheism, agnosticism, studied Islam, and it just wasn't that time for me. So to jump forward a little bit, at 29, it was my 29th birthday. So it was July 26th, it was 2011. I just turned 29. I had plans to do things. People were supposed to come over and hang out with me and kick it. And turns out nobody showed up. right? Nobody came to visit me. Nobody called me. You know, my own mother didn't call me. You know, we weren't getting along at that point in time of our relationship. So she didn't call me. My friends didn't call me. And I was at home by myself. And I just, you know, immersed myself in getting more and more intoxicated. And the more intoxicated I got, the more angry I got. So I end up, you know, going to sleep. And I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't breathe. And so when I wake up and I'm not breathing, I'm fighting for my air. I prayed. I said, God, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, show me a sign and I'll change. I was like, I don't know if you're real, but show me a sign and I change. I promise. Show me one sign. That's all I'm asking, and I'll give everything up. And so I started praying this. I started praying this in the mornings when I would walk to work. I lived right by, I taught high school, and I used to walk to work in the mornings and on the way home. So as I'm walking at 5:30 in the morning, I'm offering this prayer. God, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, show me a sign and I will change. Little did I know I was doing what the prophets did. I was praying like the prophets, like walking like they were, you know how they walk to the masjid. That's how we're supposed to do for Fajr. I was already doing that. And 2 weeks later, I meet an Ahmadi Muslim. I said, you know, you're Muslim. What sect are you? What's it about? They told me about it, introduced me to alislam.org. And the first thing was if this person is like this, if their conduct is like this because of Ahmadiyya Islam, I want to be a part of this, because I had never seen anybody behave the way that they had been, you know, the way that they conducted themselves. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. So I went straight to my classroom and went on alislam.org and went to the library. You know, mind you, I didn't look at pictures or nothing. I went straight to the library and opened up a book called The Elementary Study of Islam. In 2 sentences, I read 2 sentences. I knew it was the truth. Straight up. I could see it. I could feel it. I could breathe it. I could taste it. I knew that this was the truth. And little did I know that, you know, Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed wrote this book. I didn't know who that was. That was just some crazy name on the cover to me. And so that day I went home and I told my mother, I said, I'm going to accept Islam. And she said, you've been talking about it for, you know, almost 19 years. It's about time. And from then I started, you know, just to do small things. I knew that this was a sign. So I started reading, you know, Christianity Facts to Fiction, and that immediately answered my questions regarding the virgin birth, you know, parthenogenesis. And when I looked it up from a scientific perspective, and that, you know, in rare circumstances that are miracles, you know, species can reproduce asexually. I was like, okay, so boom, check. This answers that question. Then I went to, you know, how did Jesus die on the cross? You know, this Ahmadi was saying Jesus didn't die on the cross. He survived. He lived to be 120 years old. And I'm like, yo, what? How are you're saying this so courageously? Like, it's a fact. I had never heard somebody just be so bold and confident that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Here's why. Didn't get, you know, blood came out, water came out, didn't break the legs. And I'm just like, okay. So I started studying that. Boom, answered the question again. So 2 major questions that I had been looking for my whole life were answered within a few days. So I just started reading voraciously these books, Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. You know, every convert, you know, on this has mentioned that book. There's nothing like that book. That's one of the most incredible books written by a human being. And at this point in time in my life, I was searching so quickly. I was searching so much for the truth. I read hundreds of books. I read about Shintoism, Taoism, Taoism, Judaism, Buddhism, communism, fascism, I mean, every ism that you could possibly study, I familiarized it myself in some way, shape, or form. And I was like, this isn't it. This is written by a man. And it wasn't until I started reading the books of the Promised Messiah, the books of the Khulafa, that I said, this is not from man. This is guidance. I had never seen anything written so perfectly. And Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam is the most profound writer I have ever listened to in my entire life or read in my entire life. And somehow, some way, any person who enters brotherhood with Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam is able to develop that vision and to develop that writing skill. That's a huge sign of truth right there. That's one of the first things that my professors always say in college, in school. They say to me, man, you're an incredible writer. You know why? That's because of the Promised Messiah, alayhi salam, because I read his books. That's the only reason I can write the way that I do. Because the Promised Messiah, alayhi salam, is able to take these complex issues of the unseen and just put them there for anyone to digest. It doesn't matter what your knowledge base is or how intellectual you are. Anybody can comprehend what he's writing. And then I see it again in the first Khalifa, second Khalifa, third Khalifa, fourth, fifth. I see it in the Murabiyan. I see it in just regular folks that are giving Jalsa speeches. One of the first Jalsa speeches, or the first time I ever heard anyone give a khutbah, was Imam or Murabi Azhar Hanif Saab in July of 2012 at US Jalsa. I was like, what is this? This dude is Malcolm X. I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. And so I just kept reading and reading and reading. And mind you, I didn't know who anybody was at this point. All I knew was it clarified my understanding of who Hazrat Isa was, alayhi salam, and is, which was vitally important to me. And then it also gave me an understanding of who Allah is. It clarified, because in church growing up, I was raised to believe, that Jesus was a white man in the sky with blonde hair, blue eyes, and so the Promised Messiah, alayhi salam, talks about this process of knowledge. First is you understand it rationally, then you understand it physically, then you understand it with your soul. So I went through that process. Ahmadiyya Islam and the teachings of the Promised Messiah helped me to understand who Allah was rationally, or is rationally. Then it helped me to embody it physically through the prayers, through the postures, in the philosophy of the teachings of Islam, why we prostrate, why we put ourselves in these positions to develop this communion. And then finally, it gives, once, physical conditions affect the soul. So once your body submits, then your soul submits. And I got the opportunity to compare that. I thought about all the times that I was out late into the middle of the night and what I felt physically, how bad I felt physically, but then how my soul felt too the next day, versus waking up in the morning for Fajr and offering prayers and then going back to sleep and then waking up from that, and how different I felt physically versus and spiritually. And at a certain point, everything I used to do, Allah had struck that desire from my heart and replaced it with salat, fasting, everything that we're supposed to do. And this was incredibly important to me. That was a huge sign of truth. And people, after being in Ahmadiyya, I accepted March 12th or March 17th of 2012. There are people that I haven't seen in years that are like, yo, that's the truth, because you're completely different. Like, I don't even, I show pictures to my wife and, some family members, and they're like, there's no way that's you in that picture. Right. So not only has it transformed me spiritually, but it's changed me physically, just my facial structures. And we could see that in the Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis himself, right? He looks completely different than when he looked when he first was appointed as the Khalifa, right? That's Allah's Nur. That's the power of Allah to be able to transform people, not only physically, but spiritually. And I just thought that was absolutely incredible. So going back, when I was reading these books, all I saw was Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed. And again, I didn't look at pictures, and I didn't want to see anything. I wasn't even focused on that. I was focused on the knowledge. So I started reading Gulf Crisis in the New World Order, Revelation and Rationality, Christianity, Facts to Fiction, and I was just reading. And suddenly I'm having dreams about this man with this white beard, white turban, white, shalwar kameez. And I felt completely peaceful. And it wasn't until a few months later that once I started to understand everything, it was Khalifatul Masih IV. It was in my dreams. I had never laid eyes on this man before in my entire life, and this man is showing up in my dreams. So then I started to develop a relationship with Caliphate. So I had my relationship with Allah established, but Caliphate took me a while to wrap my head around. So in July 2012, our local Sadr of Orlando Jamaat gave up his family mulakat so I could meet Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis. And it's my first U.S. Jalsa. Huzur is there. There's like 10,000 people there. It's just absolutely bananas. I don't know anybody. And everybody just embraced me. I was overwhelmed. I was walking around like a deer, in headlights, but people just kept coming. Rahman Nasir, Uncle Jamil Gwari, just brother after brother just came up to me and just welcomed me and hugged me and, kissed me. I was just like, what is this? I was so skeptical, right? Because the way I was raised and what I had been through, somebody's always out to get you. Somebody's always trying to take advantage of you. And, I didn't have a relationship with my father. So I was skeptical of men in the first place anyways. And, now these men are coming. We're walking around holding hands, kissing me on my face, kissing me on my neck, hugging me, telling me that they love me. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle it. But alhamdulillah, I stayed there. I had my mulakat with Huzur, and on the way, it was supposed to be in one location. I went there, then they changed the location. I went to that place. And I remember waiting in the waiting room of the hotel lobby for hours, man. And I was so frustrated because at this point in time, I was still, even though I had accepted Allah, I was still disobedient. I was still into my ego. I was still into the self. So I'm frustrated at this point because I had been there for hours and I'm talking to brothers and they're asking me my story and how I was introduced to Ahmadiyya. And at a certain point, and again, I'm not proud of anything I'm talking about that I used to do, any intoxicants or even this, but that few hours before the mulakat, I almost left because I said, why am I sitting here waiting around for this man? I was frustrated. So it took me a while to build this relationship with Caliphate. And finally I met Huzur and he was so kind to me. But again, I was still skeptical. I'm like, here's this man who's showing me all this love and affection. What's he want from me? So I was very, very skeptical and concerned. So he asked me where I'm from, what my name is, what my ethnicity is. And we talked for a little bit. And at a certain point, he pulls out an alayhi salam ring and he gives it to me. And again, I had no significance. I had no understanding of what this ring means or the significance that the Khalifa of Islam just, bestowed this incredible gift and blessing upon me. And then I asked him, as we're leaving, I asked him for an Arabic name. And I told him, I said, I'm humbly requesting an Arabic name. And I told him, I said, my name is Marcus. It's a derivative of Mark, which means mighty warrior and is biblical. And he took his pen out, took out a piece of paper and kind of drew on it a little bit and then wrote the name. He says, you're Abdul Hai. I still have that paper sitting right over here. And that was when my Khalifa named me. But again, I didn't understand the significance of what just happened. So, these brothers are telling me, man, this is the best day of your life. You met the Khalifa. He gave you a ring. He gave you a name. This is, they were just absolutely enamored and thrilled for me. I mean, they were more excited than anybody had ever been for me in my entire life. They were so excited for me, but still, I didn't understand it. So people started telling me I should write to Khalifatul Masih. And again, I was skeptical. I'm like, what's writing a letter going to do? Nevertheless, I started writing letters to Khalifatul Masih, and he started to respond, sometimes from the private secretary, sometimes from himself. And I told him about the doubts, and I said, I feel satiated and I feel my thirst is quenched regarding knowledge, but I still don't understand this relationship with Caliphate. He said, just do Durood, do Tilawat, offer your prayers on time. Just keep doing that. So in 2013, we went to UK Jalsa. I was part of the American delegation, alhamdulillah. And again, we went through a few days. I was there at Jamia with all these brothers. Again, amazing. People talking to me, getting to know me. And man, it was mind-blowing on so many effects, so many regards. So number one, the first piece is we had a mulakat in September of 2013. We had an American delegation mulakat, and that was when I had my relationship with Caliphate. That's the day it was born. And I remember waiting in that room at Mahmoud Hall, sitting there, and I'm sitting all the way to the left, that last seat close to Huzur's office, right where you used to go in. And I'm sitting there next to Brother Hamza, a convert. And I'm sitting there next to another brother, I think is Osama Chowdhury, Tabligh guy from Virginia. We're waiting for Huzur to come out. And Huzur comes out, and I turn and look at him. I just immediately start crying. Immediately start weeping like I had never wept before in my entire life. It was literally like somebody had went into my heart and just turned the valve and just said, let go, man. And he walks and he sits down, and I could not take my eyes off him. And we were there for an hour and a half, about 200 of us. And Huzur graciously gave all of us an opportunity to personally introduce ourselves. And the whole hour and a half, I cried like I had never, ever cried in my entire life. It was like I was just being purified, looking at Khalifatul Masih. And that was the day I knew what everybody was talking about. I remember listening to people all the time talk about how no life with Caliphate is not, life without Caliphate is nothing. When the fourth Khalifa passed away, it was the most painful day of my life. I just could not relate. I could not understand it. But that day, I knew exactly what everybody was talking about. I knew it. And I said, this is it. This is the truth. And ever since then, alhamdulillah, my family and we've been able to build a relationship with our Khalifa. So humbled that he knows me by name. When I walk into his office and I visit him, he says, Assalamu Alaikum, Abdul Hai Sahab. This is the Caliph of Islam talking to me like this. He was there when we lost our first daughter. He was there for us for the birth of our second daughter, who's healthy, alhamdulillah. Our first girl passed away. But just the love and the affection and the guidance that he provided has just been incredible. And then the second thing that happened at UK Jalsa in 2013 was I met this man. He was also a convert at Jamia, and we were eating breakfast in that little room. And we started talking, getting to know each other. And he told me that he was from Kettering, Ohio. And I mean, where I'm from, there's not a lot of black people in Ohio, in Kettering, So he said he was from Kettering. And I said, what were you doing? I said, what were you doing in Kettering, man? He's like, oh, I'm originally from New York, but then I went to Kettering. And he was like, man, I was just getting in trouble there. I said, well, what was going on? He was like, man, I was just running around with white women and selling drugs, selling cocaine, crack cocaine. And I looked at him, and at that moment, I knew that this was the man that sold my mother drugs. So just to rewind a little bit, when I was in the military, my mom unfortunately got addicted to crack cocaine. And it was a very tumultuous point in our lives and our relationship. But alhamdulillah, we've been able to reconcile. I've introduced her to Islam, Ahmadiyya. She's read of a couple of the Promised Messiah's books. So, I'm please begging, all the viewers to pray for my mother that she accepts, inshallah. But I started talking to him, and he revealed that to me, and I knew that this was the man that had sold my mother crack cocaine. So we met Huzur together. We took international bat together. I'm holding on to his shoulder. And so I go home, and I talk to my mother, and I ask her, I said, can you tell me a little bit about the man who sold drugs to you? So she told me a little bit about him. And I said, can you describe him for me? Can you describe his skin complexion? And it was a perfect match of what the man I met, the Ahmadi Muslim I met in London versus, what she was describing. And my mother, so I asked her, I said, what's his name? And she says his name. And it was his exact name. Then I said, well, can you describe his voice? And she described his voice to a T. So at this point, I didn't know what to do with that information because, I was still a little angry about this. So over the next few years, I prayed. And I was able to pray. And I met him again in, a national Ijtima in Pennsylvania, I think in 2013. And then we went on this UK trip in 2015 with MK USA, and he was there. So at this point, I knew for a fact it was him. And when I was around him, I couldn't even have anger towards him. I couldn't even be upset with him because he's an Ahmadi Muslim. He was one of the nicest men I've ever met in my entire life. Like the way that my mother described him versus how I experienced him, they were not even the same person. So again, we have the blessed opportunity to have Mulaqat with Huzur. And one of the new converts, he asked Huzur if we can do bat. So Huzur takes us into Fazl Masjid and we do bat in Fazl Masjid. And again, I'm holding on to the same man that destroyed me and my mother's life, sold her drugs, crack cocaine, and then stole all my money. And here I am embracing this man, crying with him, having just entered brotherhood with the promised Messiah alayhi salam at the hands of Khalifatul Masih. This is the truth, man. Ahmadiyya Islam is the truth. I was able to have the same experience that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had when he was able to forgive those people that persecuted and oppressed him and killed his family members. And he was able to enter into bat. They were able to enter into bat together, and they were able to forgive all that stuff. This is only the power of Ahmadiyya Islam. There's nowhere else that this can be done. I'm sure of it. And no matter what I hear from anti-Ahmadis, ex-Ahmadi Muslims, I have felt the power of Ahmadiyya in my life multiple times. Tangibly, I have felt it on multiple occasions. So having been able to do that, so I was able to call this brother and reconcile with him. Because I showed my mother a picture of him when we were in UK on that trip. And she said, there's no way that's him. She said, when I knew him, he looked like a demon. Now all I see is an angel with light coming out of him. These were my mother's words. A non-Ahmadi, non-religious woman saying this about a man who used to sell her drugs. That Ahmadiyya and the Nur of Allah had literally transformed this man. His physical features, his spiritual, his aura, everything. I mean, it's a tangible truth. That's a sign. And you can't ignore something like this. And again, another opportunity or another example is my best friend growing up was an Ahmadi Muslim, and I never even knew it. I thought he was a Nation of Islam. They ran a very strict household, very, very pro-black family. But little did I know, they were going to the Dayton Masjid. They were going to see Khalifatul Masih. Man, Khalifatul Masih al-Rabi was 15 minutes from me when I was a child. on multiple occasions. And I didn't even know this. So long story short, my friend and I, we grew up together. He's a Muslim. You know, we met in kindergarten. He walked into class one day and had a topi on, kufi, and everybody was making fun of him. And I went, grabbed him, put my arm around him. And, you know, we were friends from that moment. And we became brothers. Our birthdays were this, you know, a day apart, born in the same year, you know, both athletic, both loved to play sports. You know, we just had everything in common. So even as a young child, man, Caliphate was in my house growing up, and I didn't even know it. So all this has come full circle. So when we were 10, he moved away. And, you know, this was in 92, man. So like the most technology we had was caller IDs. Like that was the thing. You could see somebody call you and go, oh man, it's such and such. Like to us, that was incredible. But you know, back then, when somebody moved out the hood, man, if you didn't have their number, they were gone. Like you couldn't find them. So it turns out they moved away. We were unable to catch up with each other. And I remember one time I saw him at the Dayton Philharmonic when I was 10 years old. We went on a countywide, you know, field trip. We saw a symphony play. And when we went there, he was calling out my name. And I turned and I looked and I was like, yeah, you know, we'll catch up. We'll catch up after this. After that, he had to get on his bus. I had to get on mine. Never saw him again. 26 years later, my grandmother had just passed away. I'm in Dayton, Ohio, and I'm offering tahajjud prayers in her upstairs room. And my heart is telling me, go to the masjid, man. Go to the mosque, finish your tahajjud prayers there, and offer fajr. So I finished like my 4th or 6th rakat of tahajjud. And I got in, you know, grabbed my mom's keys, hopped in the car, went to the masjid, knocked on the door. Nobody had answered. I was walking to my car again. And this time, a brother comes and opens the door and says, come on in. Raise the azan. So I called the azan, did the iqamah. He led us in fajr prayers. He did a 30-minute dars, just me and him, right? Beautiful dars. And we started talking. We talk about, you know, where I grew up. He's like, I've never really seen you around before. I told him I was visiting, so on and so forth. And we start having a conversation and, you know, we talk about Kettering, Ohio. You know, it's a 99% white city, very affluent, but we lived in the poor area, welfare, HUD housing, drugs, gangs, all that stuff. And we started talking about that. And I was like, yeah, you know, I graduated from Kettering Fairmont High School. And he was like, yeah, if my kids would have stayed, they would have graduated from there. My kids went to John F. Kennedy. They would have went to Kettering Middle School and they graduated from Fairmont. And I said, man, I was like, I have to know your kids. And he was like, yeah, I raised them in Kettering Square, Montgomery Square. I was like, there's no way that you raised your family in Kettering, Montgomery Square, man. I was like, I would know you. I lived there for 14 years. 13, 14 years. I lived there from the age of 4 to 17 when I joined the military. And he was like, yeah, I lived at 5482 because he's like, I remember that because I was born in 54. My oldest son was born in 82. And I was like, I grew up at 5651 Montgomery Square Drive. I was like, how do we not know each other? And so we start talking more and, you know, we're talking about, you know, some just racism within the city, some race issues within the Jamaat. And we start, you know, getting into, you know, so he looked at me, he was like, you're about to be 37. I said, no, Unc, I'm going to be 36 this summer. He's like, man, my oldest son is going to turn 36. And I was like, yeah, I was born July 26, 1982. And he just looked at me and said, man, that's crazy because my oldest son was born July 27th, 1982. And I just looked at him and I said, is your son? And I asked him who his son was. And then I named off his other children. He said, yeah. And he looked at me because I had introduced myself as Abdul Hai. And I told him, I said, do you remember Marcus? And he looked at me and we just started crying and laughing, man, because he's like, I knew I remembered you. I knew you. My best friend growing up was an Ahmadi Muslim. Again, I had prayed to reunite with my friend. I had prayed to forgive the man who sold my mother drugs and ruined our life for a short period of time. And only through Ahmadiyya were both of those prayers answered. I mean, literally, I prayed. Allah has answered 3 prayers for me. He doesn't have to answer anymore. For real, like he answered my first sincere prayer of showing me a sign so I can, give up what I was doing. Then he answered the prayer of forgiving the man who sold my mother drugs and my mother. And then he reunited me with my best friend that growing up. I mean, again, this is the sign of the promised Messiah. This is the truth of the promised Messiah. But the funny thing is I always, every now and then I make fun of my uncle. I always tell him, I said, man, why weren't y'all doing tabligh, man? Where was the tabligh at? Where were the flyers? Where were the barbecues, man? Where were the blood drives? I said, you would have preached to me at 10 years old, man. I would have accepted. I was looking for this. I've been looking for this. I was like, you made me live a hard life for another 19 years. But, Allah, it was Allah's will, of course, and we just joke about it. But, the promised Messiah says you can't, have strong roots unless there's manure. So I had to go through that journey to get to where I am at this moment.
Wow, Alhamdulillah, what an inspiring story. Me and you are good friends, but it's the first time I've actually heard your story in such detail. So Alhamdulillah, really inspiring. So in the end, just a quick question. If you can give all the atheists a message, or the non-Ahmadi Muslims, what they should do to learn about the truth of Ahmadiyyat, any book you want them to read, or any message you want to give them in the end, Jazakallah.
I'll say to everybody, whether you're atheist, anti-Ahmadi, ex-Ahmadi, anti-Islam, it doesn't matter. Approach this with objectivity, right? Because as Khalifatul Masih al-Rabi has said very clearly, that this is a repeated psychological phenomenon. A prophet is going to come, and you can either accept him or reject him. It's always going to be like that. So if that's the case, and that's the history over and over and over again, you have to be honest with yourself. There's only 2 classes of people. You're either a believer or you're a disbeliever. You cannot be both. Right? And that's what this comes down to. So approach Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad and put his claims through the crucible, as you should. The same way that Hazrat Isa, Hazrat Nuh, Hazrat Lut, all the prophets, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were put to the test. Do that. Objectively look at it. And from studying and doing tabligh for years, I've created this criterion of truth. And it has to be logical, rational, scientific, religiously comprehensive, and there have to be miracles and signs. There has not been one point in time where the claims of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or any of the other prophets, or Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, have went against that criterion of truth. And Brother Razi, I text you all the time asking you questions. And I ask everybody questions, any Murabiyan, any elder. I'm asking questions because I'm looking for a weakness in the claims of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And there are none. I have yet to find them personally. And again, I'm using the scientific method to approach this. I'm creating a hypothesis. I'm looking for the empirical evidence. And I have yet to see a flaw. Every answer, every response has been provided very, very clearly. So I would say too, to the anti-Ahmadis, I beg you, stop wasting your time abusing us online or in person or burning down our masjids. Collectively, go to congregational salat and pray for 2 things. Either the return of Hazrat Isa to descend literally from the sky, because you'll crush Ahmadiyyat then. Absolutely crush it. Or pray to accept the truth of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, alayhi salam, the greatest scholar, the greatest writer to have ever walked the face of the earth, and an ardent devotee of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's all you have to do. It's simple. And the thing is, just as Khalifatul Masih Arabi has said, if Hazrat Isa does descend from the sky, alayhi salam, Ahmadis will be the first to accept him. I assure you of that. And I agree with them 100%, but you'll still reject him. And he says that opposition is written in your DNA or in your destiny. Is that really what you want? Because the Quran, the Hadith, it's clear, it's crystal clear. And Brother Razi, the brother that you interviewed a couple weeks ago, he was anti-Ahmadi, abused Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam. He explained it perfectly. It's a direct lineage. It's a continuum. It's a trajectory. You can't deny the truth. It's there. And I would say too that the Quran, the Hadith, and the companions speak together in one incident. And that's when Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu was beside himself and was threatening to kill anyone who claimed that he was dead. And Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came in and shared that verse that all prophets have passed away before, and not one companion stood up and refuted that and said, well, Hazrat Isa is alive and Hazrat Idris was raised to the heavens too. It doesn't exist, because if that were the truth, I would be here debating Brother Razi if that were the truth, right? But that claim is nowhere to be found. These are innovations, these are falsehoods, these are conjecture, and it's not what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or what his companions were on. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that we need to crawl to the Imam Mahdi if we have to say our salam. And I promise, don't miss this opportunity. I beg of you, don't miss this opportunity. And another message, if I have an opportunity, there's a lot of social injustice going on. There's a revolution happening in the United States. And the question that I ask to anybody, Khalifatul Masih II said that if you want a revolution, you have to tear the previous building down to the ground. And that's what's happening right now before our eyes. My question is, what's going to replace it? What radical design is going to replace what you are tearing down right now in this moment? And the only thing that is radical, the only thing that is revolutionary is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all the prophets, and his Mahdi and his Messiah. If you want to be a radical, if you want to be a revolutionary, Caliphate, become obedient to Caliphate. This is the truth. It will always be the truth. And if you come into it objectively, and I mean, I could go on and on and on about the beauty of this Jamaat, of the teaching of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, alayhi salam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Khulafa. I mean, Khalifatul Masih Arabi again says that when you accept the promised Messiah, you develop his vision, right? That's the goal of a true believer, to develop the vision of the prophet that you follow. And he says first, right, in Gulf Crisis in the New World Order, he talks about when you're looking at a fish pond, you'll look at it the first time and you'll see the top of the water. You look at it the second time, you'll see the water and the fish. You look at it the third time, you'll see the water, the fish, and then the bottom of that water. This is the vision that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Mahdi and Messiah provide. Because if you go back and you read from this vision and you look at the Bible, you'll see the truth. There's a lot of truth in the Bible, but there's more falsehood in it. So I beg anyone who's an atheist, who's an anti-Ahmadi, ex-Ahmadi, anti-Muslim, put it to the test objectively, ask questions. And to all my brothers and sisters who have already accepted Islam and maybe questioning it, Ask questions. I've never been turned away by anyone asking questions. And again, put it to the test. And if you accept it, you accept it. And if you don't, you don't. And understand that there is going to be some sort of price to pay if you don't accept Ahmadiyyat Islam or you reject Ahmadiyyat Islam. Right? There's a quick story where Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had just come back from battle, and he met his son. And his son told him, I saw you on the battlefield and I didn't cut you down, right? Because you're my father. And Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu responds, well, if I would have seen you on the battlefield, I would have cut you down immediately because you're the enemy of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, we're not in a physical battle, obviously, but we are in a spiritual war. And that's what's happening now. That is what we believe in. So if you're going to mock our prophets and the people that we love dearly, understand that we're going to cut you down spiritually. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We love our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his Mahdi and his Messiah and his Khulafa. And you can't abuse people like that. And there's a price to pay if you reject it. And I'm just begging you to understand that. Stop wasting your time abusing us and just pray for Hazrat Isa to return, and that will crush us. But you're going to continue to wait, inshallah.
Jazakallah, dear brother, for your time. In the end, we pray that Allah continues to guide pious souls to the true Islam, Ahmadiyyat. And if you are a convert to Ahmadiyyat and want to share your story, you can email me, and inshallah we can make that happen. Jazakallah, brother Abdul Hai.
Jazakallah. Assalamu Alaikum.
Wa alaikum. If you have not yet subscribed, make sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so you can get notifications for every new video. Also, make sure to like and comment on the video and follow on Twitter and Instagram.
صل على سيدنا صل على محمد